Core. i3A processor is not a chip. A processor is a decision about who you think you are and how much of that you are willing to admit. Intel knows this. Intel has always known this. That is why they built 8 of them. Core i3, the entry point. 4 to 6 cores, a price tag that doesn't require a conversation, and a general understanding that you are here because you need a computer to be a computer and not because you need it to be a statement. The person at this tier is 22, maybe 23, either a student or someone who just stopped being one, working in a room that is also their bedroom and also occasionally their dining room depending on the day. They bought this chip because the alternative was spending more money and they couldn't make that math work. The i3 handles browsing, document editing, video playback, the occasional light game, all without complaint. What it cannot handle is a rendering queue or a key ADA title at settings that would embarrass anyone, or the quiet confidence of a person who has never once had to close a browser tab to make something else work faster. That is not a failure. That is a scope. The i3 is not pretending to be more than it is. That, in its own way, is a kind of honesty. Core i5, Core i5. The middle, 6 to 14 cores depending on the generation, a price that lands comfortably in the range where you feel like you made a real decision without fully committing to one, and a reputation built almost entirely on being correct for most people most of the time. The i5 is the processor that shows up in more builds than any other because more people are more people than any other kind of people. The person here is in their late 20s or mid 30s, has a salary that is real but not theatrical about it, and built this machine in a YouTube tutorial phase that lasted 3 weeks and produced one computer and a spreadsheet they still update occasionally. Photo editing runs, video editing runs at 1080p at reasonable timelines at a pace that does not make them feel like they are waiting for something. Gaming runs well. The Suffix landscape at this tier opens up. The U for laptop users who need a full workday on a single charge, the HS for the gaming laptop crowd who have accepted the trade of battery life for frame rate and are at peace with that trade, and the K for desktop builders who want to push the chip past its rated speed and have bought cooling to match. The comparison to Ryzen 5 lives permanently in the comments section of every i5 review ever written. Intel holds its own on single core performance. AMD holds its own on everything else. Neither is wrong. The i5 occupies the tier where the argument is genuinely interesting and genuinely unresolved, which is either frustrating or exciting depending on how you feel about arguments. Core i7, 8 to 20 cores. The tier where the person buying it has a job title that involves the word creative or the word senior or both, a monitor that costs more than some people's laptops, and a specific complaint about the last machine that they have repeated often enough that it has become part of their personality. The i7 is for people who do not want to choose between the game and the recording of the game, who want OBS open and Discord open and a browser with more tabs than is strictly defensible and still want the frame rate to hold. It holds. The HX suffix in laptops means this chip lives in machines that are thick by design, that announce themselves when you set them on a table, that have cooling systems visible from across the room and are not embarrassed about it. The KF on desktop means overclocking capability without integrated graphics, which is cheaper and fine if you already have a card, and a quiet acknowledgement that at this tier you almost certainly do. The honest thing to say about the i7 in the current landscape is that AMD's Ryzen 7 has made the conversation complicated. Cooler temperatures at comparable prices, better efficiency on workloads that care about efficiency. The i7 is not wrong. It is just no longer obviously right, which is a different situation from the one it held for most of its existence. Core i9, 16 to 24 cores. Intel's top of the consumer stack, which is a phrase that does the work of saying this is as far as you can go without changing categories entirely. The person here is a professional or a person who has decided to be treated like one, running 3D modeling software at studio scale, editing 4K footage in timelines long enough to be someone's career, playing games at settings that make other people's settings look like a choice made under duress. The suffix structure follows the i7 because at this point the differences are of degree rather than kind, and the degree is considerable. What Intel will tell you and what is true is that the i9 performs. What AMD will tell you and what is also true is that the Ryzen 9 with 3DV cache has found a specific lane in gaming performance that the i9 does not occupy and cannot easily contest. The X3D cache architecture does something to gaming frame rates that more cores and higher clocks do not replicate, and this matters to a specific and vocal population. For everyone else, for the editors and the modelers and the people who need sustained compute throughput over long projects, the i9 remains a serious answer to a serious question. Most people do not have that question, which is either a relief or a slight disappointment depending on the person. Core Ultra. Intel's declaration that the i series needed a successor and that the successor would be defined not by cores alone but by what lives alongside them. The NPU, a dedicated neural processing unit built directly into the silicon, handling AI inference tasks without routing them through the CPU or the GPU, which means your machine runs cooler under the kinds of workloads that are increasingly not optional. email, background blur in video calls, generative fill in Photoshop, upscaling and enhancement features that would have required external hardware 2 generations ago. The machines that carry Core Ultra are the high-end thin and lights, the premium gaming laptops, the Asus ROG, and Lenovo Legion tier, where the price is a conversation, but the spec sheet wins the argument. The person here has a workflow that involves multiple applications, doing multiple things that all individually would have been expensive 5 years ago and are now table stakes for their profession. They are not impressed by cores anymore. They are impressed by whether the machine stays quiet under load, whether the battery report looks reasonable at the end of a long day, whether the AI features are actually useful or merely present, mostly useful, some of them genuinely useful. The NPU is real infrastructure and not just a marketing position, which puts the Core Ultra in a different conceptual category from what preceded it, even when the performance delta on traditional benchmarks is less dramatic than the naming suggests. Intel vPro, Intel vPro. This is not a tier for the person building their own machine. This is a tier for the person who has never built their own machine because someone else builds their machine, configures it, ships it, and if anything goes wrong, fixes it from a desk 3 floors up without physically touching the device. vPro versions of i5, i7, and i9 exist for enterprise deployments, for office fleets, for any organization that needs to manage hundreds of machines without managing hundreds of incidents. Active management technology means an IT administrator can update firmware, push configurations, lock a device, or wipe it remotely, regardless of the state of the operating system. Total memory. Encryption means the credentials and keys stored in active memory become unreadable if the hardware is physically compromised. The person who cares about this is not the person using the machine. It is the person responsible for every machine, none of which they want to think about individually. vPro is the processor as institutional infrastructure. The individual user generally doesn't know it's there. That is the point. Intel Atom, ultra low power, not low power for a laptop. Low power is a design principle as a constraint that shapes everything else about what the chip is and where it goes. You will not find the Atom in a personal computer. You will find it in the point of sale terminal at a checkout counter, in the digital kiosk at an airport gate, in the camera housing watching a parking structure at 3 in the morning. No fan, often no cooling system at all. The Atom generates so little heat that the enclosure itself is enough. The person who deploys an Atom processor is not a consumer. They are an integrator or a facilities manager or someone who needed compute in a space where no one was going to maintain it and where it needed to run indefinitely without attention. The Atom does not ask for attention. It does not have a benchmark score you would repeat at a party. It just runs. That is its entire value proposition, and it is, within that proposition, excellent. Intel Celeron, the bottom. Discontinued in 2023, which is the most dignified ending available for a processor that spent most of its life at the very floor of every benchmark ranking ever published. The Celeron was not designed to be weak. It was designed to be salvageable. Intel's production process generates chips with defects. Rather than discard them, Intel disabled the defective portions and sold what remained under a different name at a lower price to people who needed something rather than nothing. 1 browser tab was fine. 2 was optimistic. The Celeron existed in cheap laptops and office machines during a period when cheap laptops and office machines were what most people had access to, and it performed that function without pretense about what it was. It is gone now. The floor has moved. Intel Pentium. Also discontinued in 2023. Slightly stronger than the Celeron, slightly more expensive, and capable of a slightly more generous interpretation of the word multitasking. 2 browser tabs, simple office applications, chess, the early Doom titles if you were willing to be patient about it. The Pentium had a long and genuinely important history before it became the second lowest entry in a lineup that was running out of reasons to maintain it. By the end, it was a brand held together mostly by recognition, a name that had meant something once and was still being used because dropping it felt like admitting something. Intel admitted it. Intel Xeon. This is not a consumer product. It was never a consumer product. And the distinction matters because the Xeon exists in a register that makes the i9 look like something you carry home in a shopping bag. 32 cores, 64 cores, in some configurations 120 cores running continuously in server racks, in data centers, in the infrastructure that underlies cloud compute and large-scale simulation, and the kind of processing that does not stop when the workday ends because for the Xeon there is no workday. Multi-socket support means a single motherboard can run 2 or more Xeons simultaneously, which is less a product feature and more a statement about what kind of problem you are solving. The Xeon dominated the professional workstation market for a long time on the strength of reliability, software certification, and the particular trust that accumulates when nothing fails at scale. AMD's Threadripper has since entered that conversation with a compelling price to performance argument, and the conversation is ongoing. At the level of the Xeon, the conversation is never really over. It is just very expensive.